Okay, get this. What if I told you that a beautiful, centuries-old Persian poem and some kind of wild, mind-bending mathematical proof were actually built from the exact same blueprint? I know, sounds impossible, right? But it turns out there just might be this hidden language, a universal grammar that connects all of human creativity. So let's dive in and see what that's all about. So look at these two things. On one hand, you've got the art of a ghazal. It's this poetic form with incredibly strict rules about, meter and rhyme. And then on the other hand, a Riemann surface, a geometric object that's governed by equally rigid mathematical laws. So the big question is, how on earth can these two creations, one of pure beauty, the other of pure logic, how can they possibly be speaking the same language?
Well, the answer is kind of like finding a Rosetta Stone for human thought. It's a model that can literally translate the principles of poetry into the language of geometry, and then right back again. And what this suggests is that creativity, it isn't just some mysterious flash of insight. Nope, it's actually a structured process, one that we can map out. And that map, it's called the Brain Kinematics Model, or BKM for short. And this model proposes that pretty much any act of sophisticated creation, doesn't matter if it's art or science, relies on four fundamental ingredients. So let's break them down. Okay, first step is the container. And this is a really fascinating idea because it kind of flips our usual thinking on its head. See, we usually imagine creativity as total absolute freedom, right? But the BKM argues the exact opposite. It says true creativity actually thrives inside a container, a set of rules or constraints that helps, and this is the key part, enables new ideas. So here's how this plays out. And this is the really cool part. In poetry, the container is that strict form of, say, a sonnet or a ghazal. And in mathematics, it's the rigid geometric framework you're working within. In both cases, the rules aren't there to limit creativity. They're there to give it a playground to flourish in. All right, the second ingredient is flow. And I love this analogy. If the container is the riverbed, then the flow is the water moving through it. It's the dynamic part, the actual movement that carries the main ideas or motifs forward. It's really the pulse of the creative work. And this just brilliantly illustrates the connection. In a poem, the flow is its rhythm, its cadence. But in mathematics, you have these concepts that describe paths of movement across a geometric surface. It is the exact same principle, dynamic movement inside a structure. It's just being expressed in two completely different languages. It's incredible. Okay, ingredient number 3 is orbit, or if you're thinking musically, refrain. This is that powerful act of returning to a central idea or a theme over and over again. But, and this is so important, it's not just boring repetition. No, each time that idea comes back, it's seen in a slightly new light. There's always a little variation. So, in poetry, this could be a recurring image that just gains a little more meaning every time it shows up. In math, you actually see it in families of repeating paths on a surface that always return to their starting point. The theme comes back, but the context has shifted, and that's what deepens the whole structure. And finally, our fourth ingredient, coordinates, or landscape. Think of this as the grounding point, right? The stable frame of reference that the whole work is viewed from. It's that unique perspective that gives the creation its context and really its stability. So for a poet, the coordinates might be their deep connection to a specific place, or a language, or even just a personal memory. For a mathematician, it's a literal coordinate system that they use to map their geometric space. But in both cases, they're doing the same job, providing an anchor, a stable point to explore from. Okay, so that's the theory. Pretty cool stuff, right? But the real question is, does it hold up in the real world? Well, let's put it to the test. We're going to look at a fascinating case study of 3 brilliant Iranian creators, 2 poets and 1 mathematician, who, as it turns out, were all using this very same toolkit. First up, we have Simin Behbahani, known as the Lioness of Iran. She was an absolute master of the ghazal. She took that really strict poetic container and just used it to create these works of incredible power, blending deeply personal lyrics with powerful calls for public justice. The form itself is what enabled her freedom. Next, there's Shahryar, a poet who wrote in both Persian and Azeri, and his work is just so deeply rooted in nostalgia and a sense of place. For him, these weren't just themes he wrote about, they were his organizing coordinates. They were the stable reference frame that anchored his entire creative universe. And then we have Maryam Mirzakhani, the first woman ever to win the Fields Medal.
That's mathematics' highest honor. And her groundbreaking work, it explored the very concepts we were just talking about, the mathematical versions of flow and orbit on these incredibly complex geometric surfaces. So here's where it all comes together so beautifully. You have Behbahani, who mastered the container. You have Sharyar, who anchored his work with coordinates. And then you have Mirzakhani, who explored flow and orbits. It's almost as if Mirzakhani's math can be read as their poetry, just translated into this amazing language of curvature and dynamics. So, okay, this model provides a stunning bridge between art and science, that's for sure. But it also raises a much bigger question. If this blueprint is really so fundamental, what else can it help us understand? Well, the answer is going to take us somewhere completely, and I mean completely, unexpected.
Believe it or not, we're going to use this same exact framework to decode our dreams, but not in the way you're probably thinking. We're going to completely throw out the story, the symbols, all the weird scenes, and instead, we're going to analyze the dream's underlying mathematical and dynamic structure.
Now, this requires a pretty radical shift in how we think about dreams. We have to stop asking, what was my dream about, and start asking a new question. What was my dream doing? We're literally moving from interpreting a story to measuring a dynamic process. So here's how it actually works. Instead of writing in a dream journal, you collect data. You capture physical signals, like your heart rate from a wearable. You track your brain rhythms. And you log simple emotions the moment you wake up. Then, all of this data gets combined into something called a dream signature vector, which is basically just a unique mathematical fingerprint for your dream. And this is the payoff. It's pretty amazing. Without knowing a single detail about what you dreamed, the story, the people, anything, this mathematical fingerprint can give us incredible insights. It can tell you how well your brain was consolidating memories, how much emotional stress it processed, and even how coherent or, fragmented your brain's dream program was that night. So what does all of this mean? I mean, we started with poetry and math, and somehow we ended up in the science of dreams. It all reveals a pretty profound truth. Creativity isn't magic. It's a fundamental process of the brain. You could even call it a universal grammar, with a clear set of rules and tools. And you know what the best part is? You can actually use these tools yourself. It doesn't matter if you're writing code, designing a product, or just trying to solve a complex problem. Think about these ingredients. Build yourself a container by defining your constraints. Find your flow to get that momentum going. Create an orbit by revisiting your core ideas with fresh eyes. And set your coordinates by making sure your perspective is crystal clear. And all of this leaves us with one last really fascinating thought. If these worlds that seemed so separate, art, mathematics, and even the wild theater of our dreams every night, if they are all built from the very same fundamental blueprint, what's the deeper message here? I mean, what are our brains really trying to tell us about the nature of thought itself?